The story of King George V and Queen Mary is one of duty, transformation, and survival. Together they guided the British monarchy through the most turbulent years of the early 20th century, a time when empires were falling, revolutions were spreading, and the world itself was changing beyond recognition. It was under their rule that the royal family took on a new identity, shedding its German roots and emerging as the House of Windsor, a symbol of unity and endurance that would carry the monarchy into the modern age. Born in 1865, George Frederick Ernest Albert was never destined to be king. As the second son of the Prince of Wales, he spent his youth in the shadow of his older brother, Prince Albert Victor. George's early life was shaped by the strict discipline of the Royal Navy, where he served for 15 years. It was there that he developed the values of duty, order, and simplicity that would define his reign. When tragedy struck in 1892 with the sudden death of his elder brother, George found himself next in line for the throne, a man of modest temperament now burdened with imperial destiny. Princess Mary of Teck, known simply as Mary, shared a similar fate of duty. Originally engaged to Albert Victor, she became betrothed to George after his brother's death. Their marriage was one of mutual respect rather than romantic passion, but it grew into one of the most stable and influential partnerships in royal history. Mary's composure, intelligence, and devotion to tradition perfectly complemented George's reserved and serious nature. Together they embodied the ideal of monarchy: steady, reliable, and deeply conscious of their responsibilities. When George ascended the throne in 1910, the British Empire stood at its zenith. The sun never set on its dominions, and the king was emperor over 1/4 of the world's population. Yet beneath that grandeur, tensions were brewing. Social reform, labor unrest, and nationalist movements in Ireland and India threatened the old order. George was not a visionary reformer, but he was a man of stability, and he approached his role as a constitutional monarch with precision. He saw the king as not a ruler of politics, but as a symbol of continuity, the one constant in a changing world. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 shattered the illusion of imperial permanence. For George and Mary, the war was not just a global conflict, it was a personal crisis. The king's own relatives sat on the opposing side. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany was his cousin, as were the Tsar and the Tsarina of Russia. As anti-German sentiment swept through Britain, the royal family's German heritage became a public liability. In one of the most decisive moments of his reign, George V made a historic choice: to renounce all German titles and rename the royal house. Thus, in 1917, the House of Windsor was born, a distinctly British identity forged from the fires of war. This transformation was more than symbolic. It represented a turning point in how monarchy related to nationhood. By aligning the crown fully with British patriotism, George ensured its survival in a century that saw monarchies across Europe fall to revolution. While the Romanovs were executed and the Habsburgs dethroned, the Windsors endured, because George understood the importance of appearing as one of the people, not above them. His simple habits, modest lifestyle, and wartime visits to soldiers and hospitals helped bridge the gap between monarchy and the masses. Queen Mary, meanwhile, played a quieter but equally vital role. Her sense of duty bordered on sacred. She visited hospitals, encouraged war charities, and supported the families of servicemen. But it was her composure, her regal stillness, that left the greatest impression. She believed the monarch's role was not to display emotion, but to embody constancy. Her famous words during the war, "The King and I will never leave London," became a defining symbol of solidarity. Together, George and Mary turned the monarchy into a moral compass for a nation in crisis. After the war, Britain was no longer the empire it once was. The rise of socialism, the independence movements abroad, and the growing influence of the press transformed the monarchy's relationship with the public. George V responded, not with resistance, but with adaptation. he embraced the new medium of radio, allowing his Christmas broadcast to reach millions of listeners, a practice that continues to this day. His speeches were formal, measured, and reassuring, designed to remind his people that, despite uncertainty, the crown remained steadfast. In private, George and Mary were deeply traditional. Their family life was governed by strict discipline, their children raised with duty and restraint. It was a household that produced both loyalty and rebellion. From the dutiful Prince Albert, later George VI, to the independent and romantic Edward VIII, whose abdication would shake the monarchy after George's death. Yet even this future crisis had its roots in the values that George instilled, that the king must serve the nation above personal desire. It was a lesson that would define the monarchy's character long after his reign ended. By the time of his death in 1936, King George V had transformed the monarchy from a European relic into a modern national institution. He had navigated world war, political unrest, and the collapse of empire, not through charisma or radical reform, but through quiet endurance. And beside him, Queen Mary had elevated the image of royal dignity to an art form. Together, they founded not just a house, but an identity, the House of Windsor, built on duty, stability, and the enduring strength of tradition. The post-war years were a delicate balancing act for King George V and Queen Mary. The empire had emerged victorious from World War I, but victory came at a cost. Economic hardship, social unrest, and a growing sense of disillusionment among the people. The old certainties had vanished, replaced by a new world that demanded humility and adaptation. George, ever the steady hand, recognized that the monarchy could no longer rely solely on grandeur. Instead, it must project service, duty, and moral authority. In the 1920s, the British royal family began appearing more frequently in public, opening hospitals, attending civic events, and supporting charities. These weren't mere formalities, they were a strategy. George understood that the monarchy's survival depended on its relevance. The royal image had to evolve from untouchable imperial splendor into something the public could see and relate to. The king, once distant and divine, was becoming human, a living emblem of continuity amid chaos. Queen Mary's influence in these years deepened. She was not a modernizer by nature, yet her intuition for the monarchy's mystique was unparalleled. Every gesture, every gown, every piece of jewelry she wore was chosen to convey dignity and permanence. Even her famously strict demeanor served a purpose, to remind the public that royalty was not about personality, but principle. Behind closed doors, however, Mary could be compassionate, especially toward her children and the wounded soldiers she continued to visit long after the war. The interwar period was also marked by political instability. In 1926, Britain was paralyzed by a general strike, and the king's measured response earned him widespread respect. Rather than siding with the government or the unions, he called for understanding. "Try living on their wages before you judge them," he told ministers, a rare statement of empathy from a monarch. This attitude cemented his reputation as a people's king, one who placed fairness above politics. But the economic depression of the 1930s tested that bond between monarch and people. Factories closed, unemployment soared, and the old empire seemed to tremble under the weight of its colonies' demands. The king, though aging and increasingly ill, worked tirelessly to preserve a sense of unity. His Christmas radio messages, calm, deliberate, and hopeful, became a national ritual. For millions, his voice symbolized reassurance, like a father speaking to his children through the static of a troubled world. In the family, however, unity was harder to maintain. George's relationship with his eldest son, Edward, the future Edward VIII, grew increasingly strained. Edward was charming, worldly, and impatient with royal protocol.
George saw in him not the steadiness of a king, but the recklessness of a playboy. He confided to his private secretary, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months." That prophecy, spoken with sorrow rather than anger, would prove hauntingly accurate. Meanwhile, Prince Albert, George's second son, struggled with self-confidence and a debilitating stammer. Yet George saw in him the same quiet resilience that had guided his own life. He often encouraged Albert to face his fears, reminding him that strength lay not in eloquence but in integrity. It was this nurturing, sometimes stern, but always purposeful, that would later shape Albert's transformation into King George VI, one of Britain's most beloved monarchs. Queen Mary continued to serve as the royal family's backbone. Her belief in duty was unwavering, even when it came at personal cost. She discouraged emotional displays, insisting that members of the royal household remain composed at all times. Yet her strictness stemmed from love, a desire to prepare her children for the weight of the crown. The monarchy, she believed, was not a privilege, but a sacred burden. As the 1930s advanced, a sense of decline began to shadow George V's reign. His health deteriorated rapidly due to chronic bronchitis and years of stress. Yet even as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp. He continued to read state papers daily, his red dispatch boxes stacked beside his sickbed. Visitors often remarked that even in illness, his presence commanded respect. The king who had weathered war and upheaval refused to yield to weakness. When King George V died in January 1936, the nation mourned not just a monarch, but an era. The man who had guided Britain through the Great War, who had redefined monarchy for the modern age, was gone. Queen Mary, standing beside his coffin, remained composed as ever, her grief hidden behind the mask of royal poise. But inside, she knew that her husband's legacy would soon be tested in ways neither one of them could ever have imagined. The world was changing again, and the crown was about to face its greatest challenge.
The year 1936 would become one of the most dramatic in the history of the British monarchy. Barely months after King George V's death, his eldest son, Edward VIII, ascended to the throne. Young, charismatic, and adored by the public. Yet behind his charm lay a storm that would shake the foundations of the crown. Edward's determination to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, placed him on a collision course with both government and church. What began as a private romance soon erupted into a constitutional crisis that gripped the world. Queen Mary watched the chaos unfold with a heavy heart. To her, monarchy was sacred, something that demanded sacrifice, not indulgence. She could not understand her son's willingness to jeopardize the institution for love. "I cannot bring myself to call her queen," she confided in letters to her friends, referring to Wallis. It wasn't cruelty, it was conviction. To Queen Mary, the crown came before all, even her own happiness, even her own child. As pressure mounted, the unthinkable happened. On December 11, 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated the throne, the first British monarch to do so voluntarily. His farewell broadcast stunned the nation. "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love." Across Britain, radios crackled with disbelief. In the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, Queen Mary stood expressionless, her face carved from duty. The monarchy had survived wars and revolutions, but never such a self-inflicted wound. In Edward's place, his younger brother, the hesitant Prince Albert, became King George VI. Shy, soft-spoken, and afflicted with a severe stammer, George seemed an unlikely ruler. Yet Queen Mary's faith in him never wavered. She told him quietly, "You were never meant to be king, but you will be the right one." Her words became prophecy. With quiet dignity, George VI would guide Britain through its darkest years, World War II. During the early years of his reign, George VI faced immense pressure to restore the monarchy's credibility. Queen Mary stood behind him as an unyielding pillar. Though now a dowager queen, she continued her royal duties tirelessly, visiting hospitals, organizing charities, and comforting those affected by the growing tensions in Europe. Her presence projected continuity and reassurance. She was living proof that the monarchy, though shaken, remained steadfast. When war finally erupted in 1939, Queen Mary became a symbol of resilience. Despite her advancing age, she refused to leave London during the Blitz. She declared, "The king and queen will stay. The children will not leave unless their parents do." Her courage inspired millions. The bombs that shattered the capital could not destroy the spirit of duty she embodied. In her quiet strength, the British people saw their own endurance reflected. Even as London burned, Queen Mary found solace in her devotion to history and art. She preserved royal heirlooms, ensuring that the monarchy's cultural heritage would survive the war intact. Her meticulous cataloging of treasures and portraits wasn't vanity. It was preservation, a way of safeguarding identity amidst destruction. When Buckingham Palace itself was hit, she remarked calmly, "I am glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." Her relationship with her son deepened during the war. George VI, once shy and uncertain, grew into a king of courage and compassion. He and Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother, visited bombed neighborhoods, shared tea with soldiers, and stood shoulder to shoulder with their people. Queen Mary, watching from her residence at Marlborough House, felt immense pride. The monarchy her husband had reshaped was now fulfilling its true purpose, not ruling from above, but serving alongside. After the war, Queen Mary retreated slightly from public life, but remained a powerful figure within the royal family. Her grandchildren adored her, especially Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II. Mary recognized in Elizabeth the same sense of duty and poise that had defined her own life. She often reminded her granddaughter, "You must always remember who you are, not for your own sake, but for theirs." It was advice that would echo through the next century. By the time of her death in 1953, just months before Elizabeth's coronation, Queen Mary had become more than a historical figure. She was the embodiment of royal endurance. From the Victorian twilight to the dawn of the modern age, she had seen the monarchy fall, rise, and transform. The House of Windsor, born from the fires of war and bound by her unshakable will, stood ready to face the future. The war had ended, but Britain emerged scarred and exhausted. Bombed cities, rationed food, and a nation rebuilding from ashes defined the late 1940s. Yet, amidst this hardship, the monarchy, under King George VI, became a beacon of national identity. The quiet, steady leadership that George and his family had shown during the war gave new meaning to kingship. It was no longer about imperial grandeur, but about service and solidarity. And at the heart of this transformation stood Queen Mary, now in her 80s, watching with quiet satisfaction as the vision she and her husband had forged continued to thrive. From her residence at Marlborough House, Queen Mary remained the matriarch of not only the royal family, but also the institution itself. Ministers, bishops, and even foreign dignitaries sought her counsel. She carried an aura of regal authority unmatched by anyone of her generation. Every detail of her life, the way she walked, spoke, and dressed, was a reminder of a vanished era of monarchy, one that balanced dignity with restraint. And yet, she understood the need for change. Britain was no longer an empire ruling the world, but a nation redefining its place in it. Her son, King George VI, was that rare monarch who earned respect through humility. His stammer, once seen as a weakness, became a symbol of courage. Every speech he made, painstakingly rehearsed, heartfelt, and measured, spoke to a people who understood struggle. Queen Mary often listened to those broadcasts with tears in her eyes, her mind drifting back to her late husband, King George V. She knew he would have been proud of the son who embodied the very qualities he cherished most: integrity, duty, and compassion. The post-war monarchy found itself walking a delicate line. Britain's empire was dissolving, colonies were seeking independence, and the winds of modernity were sweeping through society. Yet the House of Windsor adapted with surprising grace. Public appearances became less ceremonial and more personal.
The royal family opened itself cautiously to the people, inviting photographers and filmmakers to capture moments of family life. For the first time, ordinary citizens could see the monarchs not as distant figures, but as human beings sharing their joys and struggles. Queen Mary, though traditional to the core, supported these shifts. She believed that evolution, not resistance, ensured survival. Privately, she coached her granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth, instilling in her the values that had sustained the monarchy for generations. "You must never forget that the crown is not yours. It is something you hold in trust," she told her. Those lessons would become the moral compass of Elizabeth's reign, one defined by duty, discipline, and restraint. As the 1950s dawned, Queen Mary's health began to decline. Yet she continued to perform engagements until her final months, determined never to fade quietly from public life. When she was informed of King George VI's worsening condition, she felt a familiar chill of fate, the same anxiety she had endured decades earlier. She prayed for her son, but accepted that history was again preparing for a change. When George VI passed away in 1952, the grief was profound. Mary, frail but composed, wrote in her diary, "I feel as though half my heart has gone." In the month that followed, all eyes turned to the young Queen Elizabeth II, her representation of the renewal of the Windsor dynasty, the very vision that George V and Queen Mary had begun. Though she was too ill to attend the ceremony, Queen Mary made it known that she approved of every detail. "The continuity must never break. That is the secret of monarchy." Those words, her final command, became almost prophetic. Queen Mary passed away in March 1953, just weeks before Elizabeth's coronation. Her death marked the end of an age, the last living link to the Victorian world, to the empire, and to the founding of the House of Windsor itself. Her funeral was austere, as she had requested, and attended by the entire royal family. In her coffin lay a woman who had witnessed not just the fall of empires, but the rebirth of the British crown. Yet her spirit lived on in every gesture, every ceremonial uniform, and every royal broadcast that followed. Queen Mary's discipline became the model for the next 3 generations of monarchs. She understood better than anyone that royalty is not about privilege. It is about endurance. Her unwavering belief in the monarchy's moral purpose ensured that even as the world changed beyond recognition, the crown would stand firm. By the time the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II dazzled the world later that year, the House of Windsor had become more than a royal family. It had become a symbol of continuity in an uncertain world. The cameras that broadcast the event into millions of homes were not just capturing a young queen's beginning, but the fulfillment of a dream first imagined by King George V and Queen Mary. A monarchy renewed by faith, sacrifice, and purpose.
Time has a way of softening even the most disciplined lives, but for King George V and Queen Mary, their legacy has only grown sharper with every passing generation. The monarchy we recognize today, steady, dutiful, and unflinching in the face of change, is the monarchy they built. Every royal ceremony, every speech of compassion, every act of restraint from Britain's royal family carries the echo of their example. Their reign was not just a period in history, it was the blueprint for survival in a world where monarchies were falling apart. When King George V ascended the throne in 1910, Europe was still a continent of emperors and crowns. By the time of his death, most of them were gone. Yet Britain's monarchy endured, largely because George understood something his contemporaries did not, that survival demanded humility. He stripped away the excess of empire and reshaped the crown into something the public could recognize as their own. Through war, economic collapse, and social revolution, he never lost sight of his mission: to make the monarchy a moral compass, not just a ceremonial relic. Queen Mary's role in that transformation cannot be overstated. She was more than a consort, she was the monarchy's architect. Her commitment to duty and her understanding of royal symbolism became the silent strength behind every decision. Where her husband offered steadiness, she offered vision. She turned royal appearances into powerful moments of unity, and her meticulous attention to heritage preserved the sense of continuity that defines the Windsors to this day. Without Mary, the modern image of the British royal family, elegant, restrained, and enduring, might never have existed. Even their marriage, often described as formal and distant, was bound by a shared devotion to service. They were not lovers in the romantic sense the public imagines, but partners in purpose. Together, they carried the burden of kingship as one would carry a sacred flame, carefully, dutifully, ensuring it never flickered out. Their letters to each other reveal affection hidden beneath duty. Two souls who understood that love for country often demanded the sacrifice of personal emotion. Their influence is visible in every reign that followed. King George VI, their son, embodied his father's courage and his mother's composure. He restored the monarchy's moral authority during World War II, speaking to his people with honesty and resolve. Queen Elizabeth II, their granddaughter, inherited Mary's unbreakable discipline and George's quiet strength. Her 70-year reign, marked by modernity, restraint, and service, was a living monument to the foundations her grandparents laid. Even King Charles III continues that lineage of quiet purpose, facing new global challenges with the same sense of inherited duty. The House of Windsor, as George and Mary envisioned it, was more than a family name. It was an identity, a statement of resilience. When they changed it from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha during World War I, it wasn't merely an act of politics, but of symbolism. They knew that to endure, the monarchy had to feel British to its core. That decision cemented their dynasty's connection to the people and marked the birth of a new royal era, one grounded not in foreign bloodlines, but in national belonging. Their greatest triumph, however, was not in survival, but in transformation. They proved that monarchy could adapt without losing its mystique. They balanced the sacred and the ordinary, the divine and the human. In a world increasingly ruled by presidents and parliaments, they made royalty relevant again. Their philosophy was simple but profound. The crown should reflect the times without surrendering its principles. It was that philosophy that saved the institution from the fate of so many European thrones. As the 20th century unfolded, historians would look back on George and Mary as transitional figures, the last of the old monarchs and the first of the modern. But to the British people, they were something deeper. They represented the steadfast heart of a nation in turmoil. Through war and peace, through empire and loss, they embodied continuity, that unbroken line between past and future that defines British identity itself. Today, their portraits hang in palaces and galleries across the United Kingdom. Yet beyond the oil and canvas lies something greater, a legacy of quiet strength. The world remembers them not for their scandals or speeches, but for their steadiness. They taught future monarchs that leadership is not measured in charisma, but in constancy. Not in grandeur, but in grace. In the end, King George V and Queen Mary achieved something extraordinary. They turned monarchy into a mirror, one that reflected the resilience of the people it served. Their reign transformed an empire into a nation, a dynasty into a symbol, and a family into an institution that has stood for a century. As history continues to turn its pages, their legacy endures, not as relics of the past, but as the quiet architects of the modern royal world.